The dog was lying on the dead man, and she was growling at the men who'd come to carry him home. I want you to hold that picture because it's the one the platoon sergeant held for the rest of his life, and he held it wrong for a long time before he held it right. Picture it. A patrol's been hit. The dust hasn't even settled. There's a Marine on the ground who isn't getting up, who's never getting up again, and three of his brothers are crawling and stumbling toward him through the noise to do the oldest thing soldiers do, the thing that's older than the Corps and older than the country and older than anything written down. They're coming to bring him home. You do not leave them. You go get them. Every man in that patrol would have walked into fire to put hands on that body, and that's exactly what they were doing. And a dog, a Belgian Malinois, 60-some pounds of muscle and bone and a year of war in her. A dog those men had fed scraps to and scratched behind the ears and trusted with their lives every single day of that deployment. That dog threw herself down on top of the dead Marine and showed them her teeth. Ears flat, lips peeled back, a growl coming up out of her chest from someplace low and old. At her own people, at men she loved, if a dog loves. And I'll let you decide that for yourself by the end. She put her body over the body of the man on the ground, and she dared them to come closer. Sergeant Doyle, that's the platoon sergeant. I'll get to him. Sergeant Doyle told me that in that moment he hated her. He used that word. He said, "Hatch, I'm not proud of it, but I hated that dog for about 90 seconds, and 90 seconds is a long time when the rounds are still coming in." He thought she'd broken. He'd seen it before. Men break. Dogs break. The war reaches into something and twists it, and what comes out the other side isn't right anymore. He thought the grief had gotten into her, that she'd watched her people get cut down, and something had snapped, and now she was guarding a corpse like it was a bone, and she was going to get one of them killed doing it. Because every second they stood there arguing with a dog was a second they were stationary in a kill zone. He was wrong. He was so wrong that it took him 3 weeks and one more dead Marine to understand just how wrong. And by then there was nobody left to apologize to. The dog wasn't grieving. The dog was the only one in that whole patrol who understood what they were standing on. Now, let me take you back, because that's not where a story starts. That's where a story ends up, and if I dump you out at the end, you won't understand what you're looking at. Same as those men didn't understand what they were looking at. You have to come up on it the way it actually happened, day by day, the slow way, the way you earn the right to understand a thing instead of just being told it. So let me set the dog down for a minute, gently, and let me tell you about the woman who held the other end of her leash. Lance Corporal Mireille Fontaine, United States Marine Corps, out of Lafayette, Louisiana. Say that name slow if you say it at all. Mireille. It's a Creole name, French run through a couple hundred years of bayou, and come out the other side soft and round, the kind of name that doesn't survive a Marine Corps roster. By the time the Corps was done with it, half the platoon called her Fontaine, and the other half called her Frenchie, and a couple of the ones who couldn't be bothered with any of it just called her the dog handler, like she was a function and not a person. She didn't correct them. From what I can tell, she never corrected much of anybody about much of anything. She was one of the quiet ones. I've got a soft spot for the quiet ones. You'll have noticed that by now if you've sat with me before, and I won't pretend otherwise. She was 22 years old when this happened. 22. Let that sit a second. When I was 22, I thought I knew everything and I knew nothing. And I had a senior drill instructor in my past who'd already corrected most of the worst of it out of me, but I was still a boy playing at being a man. She was 22 and she was walking point in Helmand province with a dog on a leash, which I will explain to you is the single most exposed, most dangerous, most lonely job in a foot patrol, and she did it day after day after day. And she didn't complain, and she didn't quit, and she didn't break. Here's what I could find out about where she came from. And it isn't much, because she didn't talk about it. and the people who knew her best only knew the edges of it. She was an orphan, more or less. Her mother passed when Mireille was young. I couldn't get a straight answer on how, and I didn't push, because it's not mine to push. And her father wasn't in the picture, hadn't been from the start, was a name on a piece of paper somewhere, and nothing more. She was raised by her grandmother, a woman named Odette, in a little house outside Lafayette, in the part of Louisiana where the land can't decide if it's ground or water and mostly settles on being both. Spanish moss and slow rivers and afternoon thunderstorms you can set your watch by. Odette raised her on a fixed income and a strong hand and a great deal of love, the way grandmothers do when the generation in between has fallen out. And from what little Mireille said about it, she was raised right. And she was raised with animals. That's the part that matters, the part that runs straight through this whole story like a thread you can pull. Odette kept dogs, yard dogs, hunting dogs, a couple of strays that wandered up and never left because there was always a little food and never any cruelty. Mireille grew up with dogs the way some kids grow up with siblings. They were just there, they were just part of the world. They were the first language she ever learned that wasn't human. There's a thing some people have with animals, and you've met them. You know exactly what I'm talking about. A stillness, a patience, an ability to be quiet enough on the inside that an animal will trust them. You can't teach it. Schools have tried. Mireille Fontaine had it the way some people have perfect pitch. She had it before she ever wore the uniform. So when she joined the Corps, and I'll tell you in a minute why a quiet orphan girl from the bayou joins the Marine Corps, because that's its own small story. And when they ran her through the testing and the screening and the long sorting machine that decides what a Marine is going to be, somebody, some sergeant or some test or some line in a file, flagged her for the working dog program. And that, friend, was the rarest kind of luck a person can have. Being put in exactly the place where the thing you were born able to do is the thing they need you to do. Why'd she join? Near as I can reconstruct it, it was Odette. Not pushing her into it, pulling her out of something. Lafayette's a fine town, but it's a hard place to be young and poor and alone with an old woman who isn't going to be around forever, and the math of a life like that gets grim quick. Mireille watched her friends from the neighborhood take the roads that were on offer, and most of those roads went nowhere good, and a couple of them went to prison, and one of them went to the morgue before she was 19. And she sat on her grandmother's porch one evening. This is the kind of detail you only get secondhand, so take it for what it is, and she told Odette she was going to enlist. And the old woman, who had buried a daughter and raised a granddaughter and watched the neighborhood eat a generation of children, did not cry and did not argue. She said, "That's a hard road too, baby." And Mireille said, "I know, but it's a road that goes somewhere. It's a road that goes somewhere. You hold on to that line. We'll come back to it, and it'll mean something different than it does right now. Now let me tell you about the dog, because the dog is the other half of this, and you can't understand the woman without the animal any more than you can understand a rifle without the man behind it." The dog's name was Bex. BX, short for nothing. It wasn't short for Rebecca or anything sweet like that. It was just her name, assigned, military, the way these dogs get tattooed and tagged and inventoried like any other piece of government property. Because that's what she was on paper. A military working dog is not a pet and is not, technically, even treated as a person in the system. For a long stretch of this country's history, a working dog was classified as equipment, as gear, as a thing you could leave behind when the war was over. And we did. We left a great many of them behind in places I won't name. And that's a sin this country took entirely too long to stop committing. By Mireille's time, it was better. Not good. Better. The dogs came home, mostly, by then. Bex was a Belgian Malinois. If you don't know the breed, picture a German shepherd that went to selection and got cut for being too intense. Smaller, leaner, faster, wound tighter, with a drive in them that the people who breed them call high, the way you'd call a hurricane windy. A Malinois doesn't want to work. A Malinois needs to work the way you and I need to breathe. You don't motivate them. You aim them. She came out of a kennel and a training program in Texas. Lackland, most likely. That's where most of them came through. And her specialty, her MOS, if a dog had an MOS, was explosives detection. She was an EDD, explosive detection dog. Her whole job, the thing she'd been bred and built and trained from puppyhood to do, was to find the buried death that the men couldn't find. And let me tell you why that mattered in Helmand in 2011. Because if you weren't paying attention to that war, and most people weren't, by then, the country had gotten tired of it the way you get tired of a long sickness. You might not understand what was killing our people over there. It wasn't mostly the firefight. It wasn't mostly the man with the rifle on the ridgeline, though that happened too. The thing that was tearing the legs and the lives off of young Americans in Helmand province was the bomb in the ground. The IED, the improvised explosive device, which is a clean technical phrase for a dirty homemade horror, a jug of explosive, a pressure plate, two pieces of metal a hair apart, buried in a path or a doorway or a dry canal, waiting, patient, for a boot. They put them everywhere. They got good at it. They hid them from the metal detectors by using almost no metal. They hid them from the eye by burying them clean and letting the dust settle. A patrol could sweep a path with every machine the United States could build and walk right over a charge that would take a man in half. But they couldn't hide them from a nose. You cannot, it turns out, build a bomb without it smelling like something. The explosive has a scent. The components have a scent. The disturbed earth where a man knelt and dug and buried has a scent. And a dog like Beck's, with a nose that's somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 times better than yours or mine. We can't even really comprehend it. It's like trying to imagine a color you've never seen. A dog like Beck's could walk down a path and smell the death buried in it from feet away and stop and sit and look at her handler, and by sitting, save the lives of every man behind her. That was the job. Mireille walked point with Beck's off-leash ahead of her or on a long lead, and Beck's worked the ground, and the whole patrol, sometimes a dozen men, sometimes more, put their lives, every step, into the nose of a dog from a kennel in Texas and the judgment of a 22-year-old girl from Louisiana. That's not an exaggeration, and it's not me dressing it up for the story. That is the literal arithmetic of a foot patrol with a dog team in the lead. The dog finds it or the dog misses it. The dog finds it or somebody dies. There is no third thing. Now think about what that does to two creatures, the human one and the animal one, over a year of doing it together. They become one thing. I've seen it. I never handled a dog. That wasn't my world. But I knew dog handlers. I knew a few. And I watched them with their animals, and the bond there is unlike anything else I encountered in 30 years of service, and I encountered some powerful bonds. It's closer than friendship. It's closer than the bond between men in a squad, and that bond is close enough to be a kind of love that we don't have a clean word for in English. With the dog, it's something else again. Because the dog doesn't have the human's defenses, the dog doesn't hold anything back. The dog gives you the whole of itself with nothing held in reserve. And if you're a person who can receive that, if you're a quiet orphan girl who learned the language of animals on her grandmother's porch before she learned to mistrust the language of people, then what grows up between you and that dog over a year of walking point together is something I genuinely do not have words large enough for. They slept together. Did you know that? On a forward operating base, in the heat and the dust, Mireille Fontaine and the dog Beck slept in the same space. And when it was cold, Beck slept against her. And when Beck's had a nightmare, and they do, working dogs have nightmares. Their legs run and they whimper in their sleep, same as a man. When Bex had a nightmare, Mireille would put a hand on her and say something low in that Bayou soft voice, half English and half the Creole French her grandmother spoke, and the dog would settle. And when Mireille had a nightmare, and I have no doubt she did because everybody over there did, the dog was right there, 60 pounds of warm certainty pressed against her in the dark, and that, friend, is a thing a lot of men over there would have traded a great deal for, and didn't have. She fed the dog before she fed herself. Every handler worth a damn does. The dog eats first, the dog drinks first, the dog gets shade first, because the dog is the mission and the dog is also, though you're not supposed to say it this way in any official capacity, the dog is also the only thing in 10,000 miles that loves you without conditions and without an angle and without ever once letting you down. The platoon loved Bex too. They couldn't help it. Hard men, infantry Marines, the kind of men who'd give you a dead arm for showing too much feeling about anything. They were fools for that dog. They'd save bits of their chow for her. They'd talk to her in the high, silly voice everybody uses with dogs, the same men who'd just cleared a compound at gunpoint, cooing at a Malinois like she was a puppy at a county fair, because she was theirs. She walked in front of all of them. Every man in that platoon was alive on any given evening, in part because of that dog's nose, and they knew it, and there's no way to repay a debt like that except to love the thing you owe it to. Sergeant Doyle. I keep circling back to him, and I'll plant him properly now because he's the one who carried this story to me. He's the witness. This whole account comes through his eyes and his memory and his guilt. Sergeant Doyle was the platoon sergeant. A staff sergeant, actually, by the end. Career Marine. Ohio man. Steel country. The kind of NCO who was old at 30 and would be old at 80. The backbone of any unit. The man who actually runs the platoon while the lieutenant signs the paperwork. He was not a sentimental man. He told me that himself, more than once, the way men say it when they've discovered late in life that it isn't true. I'm not a sentimental man, Hatch. And then he'd tell me something that would put a crack right down the middle of that sentence. Doyle loved that dog. Doyle, who'd buried friends and written letters to mothers and done every hard thing the job demands and gone home and slept fine, by his own account. Doyle had a thing about Bex that he couldn't explain and didn't try to. He'd been the one, early in the deployment, who was skeptical of the whole dog team business. Thought it was a soft luxury. Thought a good engineer with a good detector was worth more than a dog and a girl. Said as much out loud to the wrong people on more than one occasion. And then about 3 weeks into that tour, Bex sat down in a dry irrigation canal that Doyle himself had been about to walk into. And the engineers came up and dug, careful, and there it was, a charge big enough to vaporize the front half of the patrol, buried clean, invisible, dead silent to every machine they had. And Doyle stood there looking down into that hole, and he looked at the dog, who was already moving on, already nose down on the next stretch of dirt because the work was never done. And something in him changed and never changed back. He told me he didn't say anything to anybody. He just walked up to Mireille Fontaine that evening, the quiet handler he'd been short with for 3 weeks, and he said, "I was wrong about your dog, and I was wrong about you. It won't happen again." And she looked at him, and Doyle said this is the thing he remembered. This is the thing that haunted him. She didn't gloat, and she didn't soften, and she didn't make it easy for him. She just nodded, once, the way you'd accept a fact, and she said, "She's never wrong, Staff Sergeant. That's the whole point of her. She's never wrong. She's never wrong. That's the whole point of her. Now, you hold every piece of this. The girl who learned animals before she learned to mistrust people. The dog who was born and bred and built to find the death in the ground and was, in a year of war, never once wrong about it. The platoon that loved them both. The sergeant who'd learned the hard way to trust a dog's nose over his own eyes and over every machine the Army Corps of Engineers could field. Hold all of it, gentle, in both hands. Because in a few days' time, on a hot morning in a green stretch of the Helmand River Valley, that dog is going to do the one thing nobody in that platoon was prepared for. She is going to throw herself on top of a dead American and bare her teeth at the living ones. And every instinct those men had, to recover their brother, to not leave him, to go get him no matter what, every good and decent instinct in their hearts is going to be screaming at them to do the exact thing that will kill three of them. And the only voice on the right side of it, the only one in the whole Green Valley who understands what's actually happening, is a dog who can't talk, and a girl who's learned to listen. I'll take you into that morning next. But not yet. Take a breath, friend. The hard part's still coming, and you'll want to be ready for it. Let me tell you what a day looked like before I tell you about the day that broke the pattern. Because the thing about war that nobody who wasn't there ever quite understands is how much of it is just days. Ordinary, grinding, repetitive days, one after another, and the horror, when it comes up out of the ordinary like a hand out of still water. You don't get a warning. You don't get music swelling. You get a Tuesday that's exactly like every other Tuesday right up until the second it isn't. The forward operating base they worked out of was a small one. I'm not going to name it, partly because the names of those places change and get abandoned and overrun and renamed, and partly because the name doesn't matter. It was a patch of clear dirt and HESCO barriers and plywood and dust in the Helmand River Valley, the green zone, where the river makes the land fertile, and the fertile land grows poppy, and the poppy grows money, and the money grows war. The valley was green. People always picture Afghanistan as brown, as rock and dust and mountain, and most of it is, but the river valleys are green as a golf course, irrigated for 1,000 years by canals dug by hand, a patchwork of fields and tree lines and mud-walled compounds. And every green field, and every tree line, and every mud wall was a place a man could hide a bomb or a rifle, and most of them did. Mireille's day started before the sun because Beck's started before the sun. A working dog runs hot. All that drive has to go somewhere. And Mireille would be up in the gray dark feeding her, watering her, checking her paws. A dog's paws in that country took a beating. The heat of the ground in summer could blister a pad. The rocks could split one. And a dog that can't walk is a dog that can't work and a dog in pain besides. And then the two of them would run the obedience drills and the detection drills that you never stop doing. Because a working dog's training is, like a man's marksmanship, it degrades the second you stop maintaining it. She kept Beck's sharp the way I once kept the sniper section sharp. Every single day, no days off, because the day you take off is the day the skill you needed walks out the door. And then, most days, they patrolled. I want you to really see what point looks like, because everything that happens later lives or dies on whether you understand it. A foot patrol moves in a file, more or less, spread out. You don't bunch up. Bunching up is how one bomb or one burst of fire takes 10 men instead of one. And at the very front of that file, ahead of the first rifleman, ahead of everybody, is the dog team. Beck's working the ground, nose down, quartering back and forth across the path, reading a world of scent that no human will ever perceive. And a few feet back, Mireille, watching the dog, reading the dog, because the dog can't talk. And so the entire conversation has to happen through the dog's body. The set of her ears, the speed of her tail, the way her head comes up, the way her pace changes, the way she suddenly gets very interested in one particular patch of nothing. Mireille read that dog the way you read the face of someone you've loved for 20 years. She knew the difference between Beck's distracted by a goat and Beck's onto something. She knew the difference between Beck's curious and Beck's certain. And when Beck's hit on the scent of explosive, when all that reading came down to the one thing it was all for, Bex would do what she was trained to do, which was sit. A clean, final, unmistakable sit, right at the source of the odor. And then she'd turn her head and look back at Mireille, and that look meant, here. It's here. Right here. Don't take another step. That sit stopped the entire patrol. A dozen men, frozen, because a dog sat down. And then the careful, slow, sweating work of figuring out what she'd found and getting around it or getting it cleared. And that work could take an hour, 2 hours, in the heat. Everybody exposed. Everybody knowing that where there's one, there's often more. That the enemy lays them in patterns. That the obvious way around a charge is sometimes exactly where they've buried the second one, betting on you to flinch left. Bex was, in the language of the trade, a proofed dog and a blooded one, meaning she'd done it for real, found real charges, been right when it counted, and you could trust her. And here's the thing Doyle told me, the thing I built this whole account around, the thing that I think is the truest single fact in the story. Bex was never wrong. Not once. Not in a year. I want to be careful here, because I don't traffic in fairy tales, and I'll not turn a real animal into a cartoon. Dogs miss. Working dogs have off days, get distracted, lose focus in the heat, get a nose full of dust or diesel and can't work the scent. It happens. It's normal. It's why you don't bet 100% of your life on any one tool. But Bex, in the specific sense that matters, when Bex committed, when Bex sat, when Bex turned that head and gave that look that said here, she was never wrong. Every single time she said there's death in this ground, there was death in that ground. The engineers dug, and there it was every time. A year of it. And when a dog is right that many times in a row, in a place where being wrong means a flag-draped coffin, the men around her stop treating her like a tool and start treating her like a prophet. They believed her the way you believe gravity. The dog sits, you stop. There was no daylight in it, no debate, no second-guessing. Bex sits, everybody stops, full stop, end of discussion. Everybody. Hold that. Hold how absolute that was. Because it's going to matter that on one specific morning, for 90 terrible seconds, it stopped being absolute. For 90 seconds, those men forgot the one rule that had kept them alive for a year. And I'll tell you why they forgot it, and you won't even be able to blame them, because the reason they forgot it is the best thing about them. Let me tell you about a couple of the finds, the ordinary ones, so the extraordinary one lands the way it should. There was a morning. Doyle remembered this one clear, where they were moving up a tree line toward a compound they meant to search. And it was a textbook approach, everything by the book, and Bex was working the ground and suddenly wasn't. Suddenly, she came off the path entirely, swung wide left, out into a field, away from the obvious route, and sat down in the middle of nothing. Just dirt. And a couple of the newer men got impatient, because there was nothing there, plainly nothing, a flat empty field, and they wanted to push on up the tree line where the cover was. And Doyle, this is early, this is right after he'd learned his lesson in the canal, Doyle said, if the dogs in the field were going through the field. And they grumbled, and they went out into the open where they felt naked, and the engineers came up to where Bex was sitting and swept it and got nothing on the detectors, nothing, and one of them looked at Doyle like, your dog's having an off day. And Doyle looked at Mireille, and Mireille looked at Bex, and Bex hadn't moved, still sitting, still looking back at them. Here. So they dug, by hand, careful, sweating, and about 18 inches down, well below where the detector's reach gave out, wrapped in plastic to kill the scent and using almost no metal at all, was a charge. And not just a charge laid in the field, off the path, exactly where a patrol would divert to once they got spooked off the tree line. The whole thing was a trap with two jaws. The tree line was the obvious threat, the thing your eye went to, and the field was the kill. They'd bet that a smart patrol would avoid the tree line and move through the open field, and they'd buried the death in the open field, in the safe place, the place your training tells you to go. And a dog from Texas smelled through 18 inches of dirt and a wrapping of plastic and walked her people around the jaws of a trap that every machine and every man would have walked straight into. That's who Bex was. Now you know. There was another one, and this one tells you about Mireille more than Bex. Mid-deployment. Hot patrol, long one. Everybody worn down to the nub, and Bex was tiring. Even she had limits, even a Malinois flags in that heat after hours of working scent, and she missed a beat. Came up on a culvert, one of those low concrete pipes that run under a road to let the water through. Classic place for a charge, and she went past it, didn't hit on it, kept moving. And Mireille stopped. Just stopped the whole patrol on her own authority. No sit from the dog, nothing, just a feeling. And the lieutenant came up wanting to know why they were stopped, and Mireille said, "She's tired, sir. She just walked a culvert without clearing it right. She didn't work it. I want to work it again." And the lieutenant, to his credit, said okay. And Mireille took Bex back and rested her a minute, gave her water, and then walked her at the culvert slow and deliberate, working it properly. And this time Bex hit on it hard and sat down so fast it was almost a fall. And there was the charge in the culvert, exactly where the book said it'd be, the one Bex had walked past tired. That's the team. That's why it was a team and not just a dog. The dog had the nose, but the dog was an animal, and animals get tired and lose focus. And the human had the judgment to know when the animal was off and the humility to stop the whole war and check again. A lesser handler doesn't catch that. A lesser handler trusts the dog absolutely, even through exhaustion, and a lesser handler buries men. Mireille knew the dog's limits the way she knew her own, and she covered for them. And that's a thing you can't train into somebody. That comes from learning animals on a porch before you ever learn anything else. Now let me tell you about the man. There's a man in this story who hasn't had a name yet, and he's going to be the dead one, the one on the ground, the one they come to carry home. And I've held his name back on purpose because I want you to meet him alive first. It's a cheap trick to introduce a man as a corpse. The Corps doesn't make corpses. The Corps makes men, and the corpse is just the worst thing that can happen to one. And if all you ever know of him is the dead version, you don't know him at all. His name was Corporal Daniel Reyes. And before you ask, no relation to my spotter from Panama, the Reyes I've mentioned to some of you before. It's a common name. It just happens that two men named Reyes mark two different chapters of my life. And I noticed it when I was putting this together, and I sat with it a minute, the way you do. There's no meaning in it. It's just a name the world hands out more than once. Daniel Reyes of this story was no kin to anyone I knew. He was his own man entirely, and here's who he was. 24 years old. From a town in Central California, in the long flat farm valley there. The kind of place that grows half the food this country eats and gets thanked for it about never. His people were farm people, field people, the ones who do the bent-back work in the heat that keeps your table full. And Daniel grew up in that work and joined the Corps in part to get out of it, and in part, I suspect, because a man who grows up doing hard, hot labor in fields is exactly the kind of man the infantry is looking for, and exactly the kind of man who's good at it. He was strong. He was patient. He was used to heat and used to misery and used to long days that didn't end when you were tired, and all of that made him a fine Marine. And here's the thing about Daniel Reyes, the thing everybody told Doyle and Doyle told me. He loved that dog more than any man in the platoon. It was a running joke. Reyes and Bex. Reyes would save half his food for her, the good half. And Mireille used to fuss at him about it because you're not supposed to let other people feed a working dog. It confuses the dog's bond and her discipline, and Reyes would do it anyway. sneaking her bits when Mireille's back was turned, and Bex knew exactly which Marine in that whole platoon was the soft touch, and she'd drift over to Reyes every chance she got. He talked to her. He'd sit in the dust at the end of a patrol with his back against a HESCO barrier, bone-tired, and Bex would come lie down with her head in his lap, and he'd talk to her. Low, the way you talk to a friend, and nobody ever knew what he said and nobody ever gave him grief for it, because every one of them did some version of the same thing. Reyes had a thing he said about Bex. He used to say it to the new guys, the replacements who came in nervous about walking behind a dog they didn't trust yet. He'd say, "You don't gotta be scared. She's got us. Long as she's out front, we're good. That dog loves us more than the Marine Corps does." And he'd laugh, and the new guys would laugh. And it was a joke, except it wasn't, and everybody knew it wasn't. And that's the best kind of joke, the kind that's true. That dog loves us more than the Marine Corps does. You hold that one too. You're collecting a lot of things to hold in this story, and I'm sorry for the weight of it, but it can't be helped. That's how the story's built. Every piece is going to have to be in your hands at the same time at the end, or you won't be able to feel the shape of the whole thing. So now you've got it. You've got the valley, green and beautiful and seeded with death. You've got the day, the grinding sameness of point work, the dog out front reading a world of scent, the girl reading the dog, a dozen men reading the girl. You've got the absolute, unquestioned, year-long, life-and-death law of that platoon. The dog sits, everybody stops, no exceptions, ever. You've got Bex, never wrong in the way that counts, the prophet on 4 legs they'd all have died for. You've got Mireille, the quiet orphan with the gift, who knew the dog's limits and covered them. And you've got Daniel Reyes, the farm boy from California who loved that dog most of all, who fed her his good food and let her sleep with her head in his lap, and told the scared new kids that the dog loved them more than the Corps did. Now I have to tell you about the morning. I've been putting it off, and you can probably feel me putting it off, and I'll be honest with you, friend. The reason I've been putting it off is that Doyle put it off too. Every time he tried to tell me, he'd circle it, and find one more thing to say about who they all were before he could make himself walk into what happened to them. And I find myself doing the same thing. And I think there's something right in that, something honest. So I'm going to let it stand instead of trimming it out. Some stories you have to approach the way you'd approach a wounded animal. Slow, from the side, talking low the whole way in. It was summer. It was already hot by the time they stepped off, the kind of hot that's a physical weight, that presses on you. And they were moving through the green zone toward a cluster of compounds where the intel, and you know how I feel about the intel, where the intel said there was a weapons cache and maybe a bomb maker, one of the men who built the buried death. And if you could get a bomb maker, you could maybe save 100 future legs and a dozen future lives. So it was worth the patrol, it was. Worth the risk. The math made sense. Bex was out front. It was a good morning for her, Mireille said later. She was sharp, she was working clean, ears up, tail going, that business-like rhythm of a dog who's locked in and loving the work. They moved up along a tree line, through a field, toward the compounds, and Bex cleared the path the way she'd cleared 100 paths, and the patrol came up through the green in the heat, spread out, careful, professional, a year of hard learning in every step. And then the world came apart, the way it does, with no warning at all. I'll take you into it next. Get yourself ready. And maybe, before you do, maybe go find whatever it is in your own life that loves you without an angle, the dog at your feet or the person in the next room, and just put your eyes on them for a second. You'll understand why in a little while. It started with the lead element taking fire, not the dog. Understand that. This wasn't a bomb first. This was rifles. The patrol came up toward the compounds, and the tree line on their flank lit up, that flat, hard cracking that anybody who's heard it never unhears. rounds coming in from cover maybe 150 meters out. And the patrol did what a good patrol does, which is they got down and they got behind whatever there was, and they started putting fire back. And for a minute or two, it was just a firefight. Ugly and loud, but the kind of thing those men knew how to do in their sleep. Find cover, find the enemy, win the gunfight. They were good at it. They were winning it. The fire from the tree line started to slacken under the weight of what the Marines were putting out, the way it does when the enemy realizes he's poked something with teeth. And in the middle of that, Daniel Reyes got hit. I don't know. Doyle didn't know. Nobody could ever say for certain whether it was a round from the tree line or whether it was something else. And that uncertainty is going to matter in about a minute in a way you can't see yet. But Reyes went down. Out toward the front of the patrol, not far from where Mireille and Bex had been working, in the open ground short of the first compound. He went down, and he didn't get back up, and he didn't move, and the men nearest him saw it. And the word went down the line the way it does, that flat, terrible word. Reyes is hit. Reyes is down. Man down. Man down. Now I need you to understand what that does to a group of men. Because everything that happened in the next 2 minutes happened because of what that word does. When a Marine goes down, every instinct you have, every instinct the Corps spent months and years building into you, every instinct that's older than the Corps and lives in the animal part of the brain, says one thing: get him. Go get him. You do not leave him out there. You do not let him lie in the open. You go, through fire if you have to, and you put your hands on him and you bring him back, because the deepest promise the Corps makes to a man is that we will not leave you. Alive or dead, we will not leave you. And that promise is not a slogan. It is the load-bearing wall of the entire thing. It is the reason men will do what men will do. You leave a man and the whole structure comes down. Every Marine in that patrol knew, without thinking, without deciding, that Reyes had to come back, and 3 of them started toward him before anybody gave an order. And here's where it happened. Here's the 90 seconds. Bex got to him first. She'd been out front, ahead of everyone, and when the shooting started, she'd done what she was trained to do, gone flat, taken cover near her handler. But when Reyes went down, and I think about this, I've thought about it a great deal, when Reyes went down, the dog who loved him most, the dog he'd fed his good food to and talked to in the dust, that dog broke from cover and ran to him. She got to him before any man could, and she put herself over him. And when the first Marine came scrambling up to pull Reyes back, the dog turned on him and showed her teeth and drove him back with a snarl that stopped him cold. They thought, at first, in that first second, that she was just on him out of fear or grief, that she'd run to her downed friend the way a dog does. And the Marine tried again, reached past her to grab Reyes by the drag handle on his vest, the way you're trained, get a hand on the handle and haul him to cover. And Bex came up off the body with everything she had and put her teeth an inch from his hand and held them there, lips peeled, that growl coming up out of her like something from underground. And the Marine yanked his hand back, because you do. Because a 60-pound Malinois in full snarl is a serious animal, and he wasn't going to lose a hand, not even for Reyes. And now there's chaos. Now there are 3 or 4 men trying to get to a down brother, and there's a dog. Their dog, the dog they loved, the dog they trusted with their lives, standing on him and driving them off. And the fire's still coming in. Less now, but still coming. And they're all stationary and exposed in the open, and every second is a second somebody could die. And the dog is the thing stopping them from doing the one thing every fiber of them is screaming to do. This is when Doyle hated her. He told me. I came up and I saw the dog on Reyes, snapping at my Marines, keeping us off him, and I thought, she's lost it. The dog's lost it. The grief got her or the noise got her, and she's broke, and she's going to get one of my boys killed standing here, and I have to put her down. I actually had that thought hatch. I drew on the dog. I had my weapon up on Bex and I was going to shoot her because she was between us and Reyes and I had men exposed, and I made the cold call that the dog was a malfunction and I had to clear it. He said that to me with his hands flat on his knees and his eyes somewhere I couldn't follow. I was a half second from shooting that dog. A half second. And the thing that stopped him, the only thing in the whole green valley that was on the right side of it, was a voice. Mireille Fontaine came up out of cover, and she didn't go for the dog, and she didn't go for Reyes, and she didn't draw on anything. She'd been reading that dog for a year. She'd read her tired and read her sharp and read her curious and read her certain. And she looked at Bex on top of Reyes, at the set of those ears and the angle of that body and the particular thing the dog was doing, and Mireille Fontaine understood in about 1 second what it would take Sergeant Doyle 3 weeks to forgive himself for not understanding. The dog wasn't grieving. The dog wasn't broken. The dog was alerting. She was telling them, in the only language she had, with the only body she had, the same thing she'd told them 100 times from a sitting position on a clear path. Here, it's here, right here, don't take another step. Except this time she couldn't sit, because sitting wasn't enough, sitting wouldn't stop them. They were already coming. They were already reaching. And so the dog did the only thing left that might stop a man from killing himself. She made herself a wall. She put her own body in the way, and she used the only authority a dog has over a man who won't listen, which is her teeth. There was a bomb under Reyes when he went down, and this is the thing nobody could ever say for sure, whether the enemy had set it there knowing a man would fall near it, or whether by the worst luck in the world he'd fallen onto a charge already laid, or whether the ambush itself had been built around the certainty that we would come for our dead, and they'd buried death exactly where they knew we'd kneel. When Reyes went down, his body came to rest on or beside a pressure-sensitive charge, a victim-operated device, the kind that doesn't go off when you bury it or when a body falls slack onto it, but goes off the instant the weight changes, the instant somebody grabs a drag handle and hauls. The instant you do the one thing, the decent thing, the trained thing, the thing every good Marine in that patrol was a half second from doing. The instant you try to bring your brother home. They'd built the trap around our own goodness. That's the part one can't get all the way around even now, all these years and all these stories later. They knew us. They'd studied us. They knew that when a man falls we come for him, that nothing stops us coming for him. And they turned that. The best thing about us, the thing I'd argue is the whole point of us. They turned it into the trigger. The bomb wasn't aimed at Reyes. Reyes was already gone. The bomb was aimed at the 3 men who loved him enough to run into open fire to bring him back. And the only one who knew was a dog who could smell it. Bex had smelled the charge under her own dead friend. She'd run to Reyes. Yes, I won't pretend she didn't. I think she ran to him because she loved him. I think both things are true at once. I think she ran to the man she loved and got there, and her nose hit the death in the ground beneath him, and in that instant the dog stopped being a grieving animal and became, entirely, the thing she was built to be. She covered him. And when the men came to move him onto the trigger, to pull the handle that would set it off, to kill themselves and scatter what was left of Reyes across that field for nothing, the dog stood on the bomb and bared her teeth at the people she loved most in the world, and she took their hatred, and she held the line, because she was the only one who knew and she had no other way to say it. Mireille screamed it. That's what stopped Doyle's half-second. She screamed. Doyle remembered the exact words. He said they'll be the last words in his head when he dies. She screamed. Don't touch him. It's a trap. She's on IT. She's alerting. Don't touch him. And the law of the platoon, the year-long absolute law that those 90 seconds of chaos had knocked out of every man's head. The dog sits. Everybody stops. That law came roaring back the instant Mireille put words to what the dog was doing. Because the second she said it, every man there knew it was true. They'd watched that dog be right 100 times. They'd built their whole survival on her never being wrong. And the half-second Doyle had his weapon on Bex turned into Doyle screaming louder than Mireille. Freeze. Everybody freeze. Nobody touches Reyes. Get back. Get back. And grabbing the Marine nearest the body by the back of his vest and hauling him bodily away from his fallen brother. And that, friend, is its own kind of agony. And I want you to sit in it for a second because the men who lived it had to. Because now they understood. Now they knew the dog was right. The dog was always right. And that meant they could not go get Reyes. Could not bring him in. Could not put hands on him. The deepest promise the Corps makes, we will not leave you. And they had to stand there in the open and not keep it. Had to leave their brother lying in the dirt with a bomb under him, because going to him meant joining him. The dog had saved 3 living men by making it impossible to recover a dead one. She'd traded the one thing they could not bear to leave behind for the 3 things they could not afford to lose. And there's no clean feeling in that. There's no relief in it. There's just 3 men alive and 1 man in the dirt they're not allowed to touch and a dog standing guard over all of it. And the fire finally dying off in the tree line, and the heat, and the dust, and the worst arithmetic in the world coming out exactly even. They got the fight finished. The enemy in the tree line, having sprung what they came to spring, melted away the way they did, and the Marines secured the ground. And then began the long, careful, terrible business of dealing with what Bex had found. They called it up. EOD, the explosive ordnance disposal teams, the men who walk toward the bomb everybody else walks away from. The bravest specific job I know of in any military on Earth. EOD came forward. And Mireille had to call Bex off the body. That's its own small piece I have to give you, because it nearly broke her. And Doyle saw it and never forgot it. The dog would not come off Reyes. Mireille called her, gave her the commands, the recall she'd drilled 10,000 times, and Bex would not leave him. The job was done. The alert was understood. The men were clear, and still the dog lay on her dead friend and would not be moved. And now it wasn't the bomb. Now it was the other thing. Now it was grief after all. Now that the work was finished, there was nothing left in the dog but the loss of the man who'd fed her his good food and let her sleep with her head in his lap. And Mireille had to go to her. Carefully, because of the charge, EOD talking her through every footfall, and get down next to her dog on the edge of a live bomb, and put her hands on her, and speak to her low, half English and half her grandmother's French, and physically gather that dog up and carry her off the body of Daniel Reyes while the dog cried. Because dogs do cry, not tears but a sound. And Mireille carried her crying dog away from the man they'd both loved so that strangers could come and take the bomb apart and finally bring him home. It took EOD a long time. The charge was real. It was substantial. It was exactly what Mireille had screamed it was, victim-operated. Set to fire on a weight change, set to kill whoever moved the body. The EOD tech who rendered it safe, and I'd give you his name if I had it, because he earned having it said, that man confirmed it cold. If anyone had pulled Reyes by that drag handle, the device would have functioned, and at that range, with that charge, with 3 men bunched around a body trying to lift it, he reckoned they'd have lost all 3 and maybe a 4th. The corpsman who'd have run in after. 3 living Marines. Maybe 4. That's what the dog bought with 90 seconds of being hated by the people she loved. And here is the thing I have carried since Doyle told me this. The thing I turn over on the porch in the mornings. And I'll give it to you plain because you've earned it by sitting through the hard part. Bex did the math no human could do. And she did it in the worst possible language. And she did it knowing. If a dog can know, that it would cost her the love of her own people for as long as it took them to understand. She stood on her dead friend and snarled at her living ones, and let a man she trusted put a weapon to her head, and she held the line, because she was the only one who knew, and she had no words, and the only thing she had was her body and her teeth, and the willingness to be hated to keep them alive. I knew a senior drill instructor once, back in '79, man named Kowalski, a hard old Vietnam Marine. And he hit me exactly twice in 13 weeks, and both times I deserved it, and both times he was right. And I hated him for it in the moment. The way you hate the thing that's correcting you before you understand the correction. And I think about old Kowalski and that dog together, which probably sounds strange to you. But it's this. Sometimes the thing that loves you most is the thing that stands in your way. Sometimes love isn't the hand that pulls you forward. Sometimes love is the body that blocks the door, the teeth bared in your face, the voice that says no, not that way, not one more step, and takes your hatred for it, and holds the line anyway, and waits for you to live long enough to understand. 3 men lived that day who'd be dead. They didn't thank the dog. They couldn't. Not then. They were in shock, and they were grieving Reyes, and they were a long way from being able to feel anything as clean as gratitude. That comes later, for some of them. For one of them, it never came at all. But that's a different part of the story. Reyes came home. Bex's alert made sure of it. Not by saving him. He was already gone. But by making sure that when they finally brought him back, they brought him back whole. In one piece. In a flag-draped transfer case instead of scattered across a field in Helmand. There's a mother in Central California who got to bury her son whole because a dog wouldn't let anybody touch him until it was safe. She doesn't know that. There's a lot of people in this story who never knew the things they owed. And 3 weeks later, I told you at the very start, I told you the math got harder. 3 weeks later, the dog who'd saved them all was lying in the dirt again, and this time it was Mireille Fontaine on the ground, and this time there was no one who understood in time. I'll tell you the rest. But take a breath first, friend. Take a long one. The dog's part is done now, the hardest, bravest part, and you should sit with it a moment before we go on to the part that's just sad. They got back to the FOB that night with 1 man fewer than they'd left with. And that's the arithmetic that never gets easier no matter how many times you do it. I've done it. You count the men out the wire in the morning, and you count them back in at night, and the day you come back light is the day that changes the color of everything for a while. They came back light. Daniel Reyes was in a transfer case by then, headed to the rear, headed home, whole. And that word, whole, was the only mercy in any of it. And most of them didn't even understand yet that it was the dog who'd given them that mercy. Because here's what grief does, and anybody who's lost somebody in that particular way knows it. It doesn't make room for gratitude. Not right away. Those 3 men whose lives Bex had bought, they weren't thanking her that night. They were sitting in the dark with the specific hell of a man who's lost a brother and can't stop running the tape. And the tape for them had a dog in it. A dog snarling, a dog driving them back from Reyes, a dog they'd half wanted dead in the moment. The understanding came later. It came in pieces, over days, as the picture assembled itself and the EOD report came back and the words victim operated and weight activated started circulating. And one by one those men did the math that the dog had done in a single second, and one by one they understood what she'd actually done. And what it had cost her to do it, and what it would have cost them if she hadn't. Doyle understood first, because Doyle had been a half second from shooting her, and a man doesn't forget a thing like that. He went looking for Mireille that night. Found her where you'd expect, off by herself with the dog, sitting in the dirt with her back against a Hesco and Bex pressed against her, and the dog wasn't right. Doyle said you could see it. The dog wasn't right. She kept lifting her head and looking back toward the wire, toward where they'd left, looking for Reyes, the way a dog does when somebody who should be there isn't. And Mireille had an arm over her, and she was just sitting with her, not saying anything. The two of them grieving the same man in the same dirt in their two different languages. And Doyle, who was not a sentimental man, sat down next to them. Didn't say much. "What do you say?" He told me the only thing he could get out was, "I almost shot her." Just that. A confession, because he had to put it down somewhere or carry it alone. And Mireille looked at him, and Doyle said she didn't have an ounce of anger in it, which somehow made it worse. And she said, "Everybody almost did, Staff Sergeant. She knew you would. That's why she did it anyway." And then she said the thing that Doyle carried the rest of his life, the thing he repeated to me twice to make sure I had it right. "That's the job. She knew none of you would understand till it was over. She did it anyway. That's the whole job. She did it anyway. That's the whole job. Now I have to tell you about the paperwork, and I'm going to tell it to you plain, and I'm going to keep my voice level while I do it, because if I let myself get going on this part, I'll be here all night, and it won't help anybody. What Mireille Fontaine and that dog did out there, reading the alert, stopping the recovery, saving 3 men, maybe 4, that's the kind of action that gets written up. That's supposed to get written up. There's a process. An officer or a senior NCO who witnessed it puts pen to paper, lays out what happened, recommends the people involved for recognition appropriate to the act, and it goes up the chain. Company, battalion, regiment, and somewhere up there a board looks at it, and a commander signs it, and a Marine gets a medal. And more important than the medal, a Marine gets it in the record, in the permanent file, in the history, that on such and such a date, she did such and such a thing, and it mattered. Doyle wrote it up. I want that on the record, because Doyle did the right thing. He was the platoon sergeant, he witnessed it, and he sat down. A man who hated paperwork, a man who'd rather have done anything else. And he wrote up what Lance Corporal Fontaine had done. He wrote it the way it happened. He wrote that she read the alert when no one else could, that she stopped the recovery, that her judgment and her dog's nose saved the lives of named Marines whom he listed by name. He put it up the chain. He did everything right. And here's what happened to it. The action got recognized. But it got recognized as an EOD action. You understand what I'm telling you? The story that went up and the story that got remembered and the story that ended up in the official telling was about the explosive ordnance disposal team. The men who came forward and rendered the device safe. And those men earned their recognition. Make no mistake, I'll not take a thing from EOD. Walking up on a live victim-operated charge is about as brave as the job gets. And they did it cold, and they did it right, and they deserved every bit of what they got. That's not the wrong I'm pointing at. The wrong is what got left out. Because by the time the story had gone up the chain and come back down as the official version, the device had been located and rendered safe. And the way it read, you'd think it got located by the EOD team's equipment, by the system, by the process. The dog was a line item if she was mentioned at all. The handler, the 22-year-old who read an alert that looked exactly like a dog going crazy, who screamed the right words in the half-second before her platoon sergeant put a weapon to her dog, whose judgment is the entire reason there was a device left intact for EOD to render safe. The handler wasn't the story anymore. Why does that happen? I'll tell you, and I'll tell you without raising my voice. It happens because the system understands some things and doesn't understand others. The system understands a man walking up to a bomb and taking it apart. That's clean. That's a clear act with a clear actor and a clear piece of equipment, and it fits in the boxes the forms have. The system does not understand a dog smelling death through a corpse and a girl reading the dog's body and screaming the right words in time. There's no box for that. There's no equipment line for she knew the dog. There's no award citation language for she trusted an animal over every man's instinct, including her own commander's. It doesn't fit. And things that don't fit, the system rounds off, smooths over, files under the nearest thing it does understand. The dog and the girl got rounded down into the device was located and rendered safe. Passive voice, no actor, and the credit flowed to the part of the event the paperwork had a shape for. Doyle fought it. As much as a platoon sergeant can fight a thing like that, he fought it. He went up to people and said, "No, that's not how it happened. The dog alerted on the body." Fontaine called it. That's the only reason anybody knew. And he got the things you get. He got the write-ups been processed. He got EODs already in the report. He got the slow shrug of a machine that had already digested the event and produced its output and had no appetite for being told it had digested it wrong. And Doyle was a staff sergeant with a war to keep fighting and a platoon to keep alive. And there's only so long a man in that position can spend pushing against a closed door before the war demands he turn around and tend to the living. So he let it go. He had to. I'd have let it go too. You'd have let it go too. That's not the failure of any one man. That's the failure of a system that has boxes for some kinds of courage and no box at all for others. So there's no medal in this story for Mireille Fontaine. I want to be honest with you about that, because some of you are sitting there waiting for the part where she gets pinned, where the general comes down and makes it right, and I'd be lying to you if I dressed one up. There isn't one. What she got was the knowledge, and Doyle made sure she had at least this: that 3 men, for counting the corpsman, were alive because of her and her dog. She had that. Whether that's enough, whether that should ever have to be enough, I'll let you decide, because I've decided and my decision isn't fit for this telling. What I'll say is this: Mireille didn't seem to need the medal. Doyle was clear on that. He went to her, frustrated, after he'd lost the fight up the chain, and he tried to apologize for it, tried to tell her it wasn't right that the dog and her judgment got written out of it. And she, 22 years old, 3 weeks from the end of her life and not knowing it, she stopped him. She said, "Staff Sergeant." The 3 of them went home. That's the medal. I don't need it written down. And she scratched the dog behind the ears, and the dog leaned into her hand the way they do. And that was the end of the conversation, and Doyle walked away from it not knowing whether he'd just been comforted or schooled, and decided, eventually, that it was both. The 3 of them went home. That's the medal. She didn't need it written down. I think about that a great deal, friend. I think about it on the porch in the mornings. Because there's a kind of person, and I've known a few, just a few, in 30 years, who genuinely does not need it written down. Who does the thing because the thing needed doing, and the reward is that it got done, and that's the whole of it. And they're not performing that for you. It's not modesty. It's not a pose. It's just how they're built. They're rare. They're the best of us, I think, and they're the ones the system is worst at honoring, because the system runs on people wanting it written down, and these ones don't give the system anything to grip. Mireille Fontaine was one of those. She learned animals before she learned to want things from people, and maybe that's connected. Maybe a person raised by a grandmother in a yard full of dogs in the Louisiana low country learns early that love and worth aren't things you get written down. They're things you do every morning with your hands for something that can't thank you in any language you'd recognize. Now I have to tell you the last part, and it's the part that turns this whole thing. And I've been walking up on it slow the way I've walked up on every hard thing in this story, because it doesn't get easier with the approach, but it gets honester. It was 3 weeks later. 3 weeks after the morning Beck stood on Daniel Reyes and saved 3 lives, the platoon was out again, because that's the thing about that war that the people back home never quite held in their minds. There was no after. You lost a man. You grieved him in the time you had, which was almost none, and you went back out, because the patrols didn't stop. The valley didn't get safer. The war didn't pause to let you catch your breath. 3 weeks. Reyes wasn't even cold in the ground in California yet, and the platoon was back in the green zone, and Mireille and Bex were out front, where they always were, doing the job, walking the point that nobody else could walk. And there was a contact, another ambush, another tree line, the same ugly grammar as before. And in the course of it, there was a blast, an IED, command detonated or victim operated. Doyle was never certain which, and it doesn't change anything. And in the chaos of fire and the need to move men out of a kill zone, Lance Corporal Mireille Fontaine did the thing she had always done, the thing her whole life had been pointing at since a little girl on a porch in Lafayette learned to put herself between the helpless thing and the hard world. She moved to cover the withdrawal. She put herself between her people and the threat so the others could get out. And this time there was no dog who could smell it coming. This time there was no alert. This time the death in the ground or the death from the tree line. And I'm not going to pretend to you I know the exact mechanism, because Doyle didn't, and I won't invent it. This time it came for her, and there was no nose in the world that could have stopped it, and no judgment quick enough, and no voice that could have screamed the right words in time. Mireille Fontaine was 22 years old. Bex lived. I'll tell you the rest of it. What happened to the dog, what happened to the three men, where the story finally comes to rest. In just a minute. But not yet. Take a breath, friend. I know I already used that one earlier, and I told you I only get the one. I'm using a second. Some stories earn it. This is one. Bex lived. I told you that, and I left you on it on purpose, because it's the hinge the whole rest turns on. She lived, and she did the thing she did the first time, the thing that's written into that breed and into that bond deeper than any training goes. When Mireille went down, Bex went to her, the same as she'd gone to Reyes. She broke to her handler, and she put herself over her, and she would not leave. And this time there was no bomb under the body. This time there was nothing to alert to, nothing to save, no three men to drive back from a trigger. This time there was just a dog lying on the person who'd fed her before she fed herself, who'd slept against her in the cold, who'd spoken to her low in two languages in the dark, who'd known her tired and known her sharp and known her certain, who'd been, for a year, the other half of the one creature they made together out on the point where nobody else could walk. And this time the dog wasn't doing the job. This time the dog was just grieving, the way she'd tried to grieve Reyes before her nose pulled her back to work. There was no work left. There was just the loss. And they had to take her off the body again, same as before. And there was nobody left to call her gently, in two languages, with the one voice she'd have come for, because that voice was the thing on the ground. Doyle had to do it. The man who'd nearly shot her 3 weeks earlier had to get down in the dirt next to that dog and put his hands on her and pull her off the body of the only person in the world she'd have left her alive for. And the dog fought him, and the dog cried. That sound again, that sound he'd heard once before. And Doyle, who was not a sentimental man, told me that pulling Bex off of Mireille Fontaine was the single hardest physical act of his entire 30 years in the Corps, and he'd carried wounded men and he'd carried dead ones, and none of it was as heavy as that dog who did not want to be carried away from her person. He got her clear. The platoon got Mireille home. Whole. I'll give you that much mercy in the telling because they got it in the living of it. She came home whole, the way Reyes did. And there's a grandmother in Lafayette who got to bury her granddaughter and not a scattering. And that's the kind of small mercy that war hands out instead of the large ones you actually want. Now, the dog. A military working dog whose handler is killed in action is in a strange and terrible spot, and the system, for once, gets this one closer to right than it used to. There was a time, and I told you about it at the start, when a dog like Bex would have been treated as surplus equipment and disposed of accordingly. And I'll not describe what disposed of used to mean because it'll make you sick, and it should. By Mireille's time it was better. The dogs came home. And there's a thing that happens when it's done right that I want to tell you about, because it's the only clean light in this whole account, and you've earned a little light. There's a priority when a working dog is retired or when the dog's handler is killed for the family, for the people connected to that dog and that handler. And Doyle, again, the man who'd hated her for 90 seconds and spent the rest of his life on the other side of that ledger. Doyle made it his business. The way he'd fought the paperwork and lost, he fought this one and won. He found out where Bex was being routed, and he got himself into the conversation, and he made the calls, and he pushed the way an old staff sergeant knows how to push. And he made sure that when Bex was retired out of service, that dog went to the one place on earth she should have gone. She went to Lafayette. She went to the little house outside Lafayette in the part of Louisiana that can't decide if it's land or water. The house with the Spanish moss and the afternoon thunderstorms you can set your watch by. The porch where a little girl had learned the language of animals before she learned to mistrust the language of people. She went to Odette, to Mireille's grandmother, the old woman who'd buried a daughter and raised a granddaughter, and then, God help her, buried the granddaughter too, and who had nothing left of any of it except a folded flag and a few photographs and a dog she'd never met who had lain down on her granddaughter's body in a field in Afghanistan and refused to leave it. Think about that meeting. I do. I think about an old Creole woman standing on a porch in the heat, and a Belgian Malinois coming up the steps, a dog who'd walked point in a war, a dog who'd smelled death through a corpse and saved 3 men and been hated for it, a dog who'd lost the 2 people she loved most in the world inside of a month. And these 2 strangers, the grandmother and the dog, who had exactly one thing in common, which was Mireille, who had loved the same person, who were, both of them, all that was left of her on this earth. Odette took her in. Of course she did. And Bex, by every account I could gather, and I gathered what I could, because I needed to know how it came out. I couldn't have lived with not knowing. Bex settled there. It took time. A war dog doesn't unwind in a week. There were the nightmares, the legs running in sleep, the coming up off the floor at a sound. But the bayou is quiet and the old woman was patient, patient the way only someone who's lost that much can be patient. And there were other animals around the place the way there always had been. And there was a porch and the slow rivers and the long green afternoons, and a dog who'd been built and bred and trained for nothing, but work finally, at the end, got to just be a dog, got to lie in the shade, got to be loved by somebody with no mission attached to it, got to grow old. She lived a long time for a war dog. I'll tell you what I was able to confirm. Bex lived out her years on that place outside Lafayette with Odette in the quiet, and she passed in 2019, an old dog, in her sleep, in the cool part of a Louisiana morning, on the porch where her person had grown up. She is buried there. There's a stone. I know what it says because Doyle made the trip down, years on, an old retired Marine driving to Louisiana to stand at the grave of a dog, and he told me what the stone says, and Odette had it cut herself, and it says, she never left anyone behind. That's all. No rank, no kennel number, no MOS. She never left anyone behind, which is the deepest promise the Corps makes. The load-bearing wall of the whole thing, the thing I told you about back when 3 living men were trying to drag a dead one onto a bomb. The Corps makes that promise to its people. And it turned out the one who kept it most completely, the one who kept it past her own death, past being hated for it, past every instinct of the men around her, the one who never once left anyone behind, was a dog from a kennel in Texas who couldn't speak a word of it. The 3 men lived. I told you one of them never came to gratitude, and I'll close that out so you're not left wondering. One of the 3, I won't say which, and I won't say much, one of the 3 could never make his peace with it. Couldn't get past that the price of his own life was Reyes left in the dirt and a dog snarling in his face, and the whole order of the world turned inside out in 90 seconds. Some men can hold that. some men. It holds them and won't let go. And that man carried it hard and carried it badly, and I don't know how his road came out, and I'll not guess at it. Because guessing at a man's private wreckage is a thing I won't do for a story. But the other two understood, in time, all the way down. And both of them, Doyle told me, named children for Reyes. Not for the dog. You don't name a child for a dog, but for the man whose death the dog had refused to let be in vain. There are two people walking around this country right now, grown by now, carrying the name Daniel, who are named that because a dog stood her ground. That's a chain, friend. You see it? A dog smells death in the ground. A girl reads the dog. 3 men live. 2 of them make families. 2 children carry a dead man's name. None of it written down anywhere official. No medal, no citation. The whole thing rounded down to the device was located and rendered safe. And yet there it all is, running forward into the future, generation into generation, because a quiet orphan from the bayou trusted an animal over every instinct in the world and screamed the right words in the half-second she had. Now let me go back to where we started, because I promised you I would. And a promise is a promise even in the telling of a story. The dog was lying on the dead man, and she was growling at the men who'd come to carry him home. You couldn't read that picture at the start. Neither could Doyle. It looked like an animal that had broken. It looked like grief gone wrong, like loyalty curdled into something dangerous, like the war reaching in and twisting one more thing out of true. A dog standing on a corpse, baring her teeth at the people who loved her, driving back the very men who'd come to do the decent thing. The most natural reading in the world is that something had gone wrong with her. And now you know. Now you can read it the way it actually was. That wasn't a dog who'd broken. That was a dog doing the truest thing she'd ever done, the bravest, the most loving, standing on the danger, putting her own body in the path of the people she loved, baring her teeth not because the love had failed, but because the love was the whole point, taking their hatred onto herself because it was the only currency she had to buy their lives, and holding the line, alone, in a language none of them could understand, trusting. If a dog can trust, that someone would understand in time. Sometimes the thing that loves you most is the thing standing in your way. I told you that already, back at the pike of it, and I told you about old Kowalski who hit me twice and was right both times, and I'll stand on it now at the end. Sometimes love isn't the hand that pulls you forward into what you want. Sometimes love is the body in the doorway, the teeth in your face, the voice that says no, not that way, not one more step. And it takes your anger for it, and it holds the line anyway, and it waits. Patient, the way the bayou is patient, the way an old woman who's lost everything is patient, for you to live long enough to understand what it did and why. Most of us, if we're lucky, have had a thing like that in our lives. A person, an animal, a hard old drill instructor, somebody who stood in our way when every fiber of us wanted to go the wrong direction, and we hated them for it. In the moment, the way Doyle hated the dog for 90 seconds. And the work of a whole life, I've come to think, is living long enough and clearly enough to get to the other side of that hatred and see the thing for what it was. To understand, finally, that the body in the doorway was the love. Bex understood it from the start. That's the thing. She didn't have to live long enough to come around to it, because she never had it backward in the first place. The understanding the men had to fight 3 weeks and a lifetime to reach. She was just born with it, or bred with it, or it grew in her on the point where nobody else could walk. She knew that love and the willingness to be hated are sometimes the same act. She knew it in her body, and she spent the last clear act of her working life proving it, on a dead man, in a green field, with her teeth bared at everyone she loved. She never left anyone behind. That's on the stone in Louisiana. And it's true, and it's the truest thing in this whole account. And I've got nothing to add to it and nothing that could improve it. That's the story, friend. That's the whole of it. The way Doyle carried it to me and the way I've carried it to you. And now it's yours to carry too, which is the only kind of immortality most of these people and most of these animals ever get. Somebody, somewhere, knowing the name. Mireille Fontaine, Daniel Reyes, a dog named Bex, an old woman named Odette on a porch. Say them once, even just in your head, before you go on with your day. That's all the metal any of them ever needed. The remembering is the metal. I'll be here tomorrow. There's always another one. The country's full of these, full of the quiet ones, the paperwork rounded down. And as long as I've got mornings on this porch, I'll keep finding them and bringing them to you. So if this one sat with you the way it sat with me, you stay close and you come on back and bring somebody with you next time. Somebody who needs to hear that the thing standing in their way might just be the thing that loves them most. Some folks need to hear that more than they'll ever say. Go find whatever it is in your life that loves you without an angle. The dog at your feet. The person in the next room. Put your eyes on them a second. Tell them, if you can. You don't always get 3 weeks. This is Hatch. Watch your 6 and watch over each other.